Yeah, I mean, the actual experience of being struck by lightning was really unpleasant, very painful, and had a lot of trouble following it. But realizing that my consciousness continued, even though my body was unconscious, and I don't know exactly how long, I guess around 10 minutes. But knowing that I continued to live, even though my body wasn't alive, wasn't functioning, and having the experience of going home and experiencing the kind of love that we all long for, and getting messages that would help me in my daily life, and then coming back into that body that was in the street in the water, was really transformational. Really. Hi, this is your superior self, and I am Paul Aurand.
Paul, switching it up. My man, thank you so much for taking the time. I just got done finishing your book, Essential Healing. I truly, truly, truly highly recommend this book to anyone out there who is struggling with trauma. I think some of the tools in this book have helped me recently deal with a lot of trauma in my body. So thank you so much for, one, taking the time to come on the show, and two, for writing this book.
Thank you. I really put my heart and soul into it. And 30 years of doing the work, I really saw lots of patterns over the years and worked hard to record the processes I was doing with people so that people could learn from them and practice them themselves. I'm a really big fan of self-therapy and self-growth.
Mm-hmm. Hypnotherapy, regression-based practices. Oh, and we're talking about regressing not just to childhood. We're talking about utero as well, and possibly past lives as well, correct?
I began just doing regression for childhood trauma primarily, and then spontaneously had people regress to earlier times. I wasn't really even sure what was going on initially, but I saw it enough times working with people with chronic pain and chronic illness that where it happened, I said I have to learn how to facilitate this and look even further back than childhood.
Mm-hmm. What was your first regression where things started getting interesting, where they started bringing up, I guess past lives or utero trauma?
Yeah. I think the first that I remember was a woman that I was seeing in a pain clinic, where I was working with an osteopath. And I learned hypnoanesthesia, how to anesthetize pain, which is really symptomatic treatment, and was frustrated with the temporary results, really. And so started exploring more what the source of the pain was for people. And I'd often regress back to traumatic experiences that then sort of locked in the pain. But with this particular individual, she had been through the mill 7 years with chronic shoulder pain, every diagnosis you could imagine, all kinds of treatments that weren't very successful. And that's how she ended up with the weird hypnotherapist in the office. And I was working to facilitate a dialogue between the pain. That's something I learned to do, was rather than just make it go away, find out, well, what's its message, right? And in the process of trying to listen to what her shoulder would tell her, she spontaneously regressed to a past life. And I wasn't really even sure what was happening at first, but she told this fascinating story about being a slave, which obviously in this life she wasn't, where she was caught stealing food and was beaten to death for it. Mm. And in the process, her shoulder was stomped on and crushed. And now I know how to do releases and forgiveness and interventions. I wasn't sure how to do it with this rather fantastic story. She was just amazed or surprised as I was about what was unfolding. It wasn't really part of her belief system. So I took her through the process, brought her out, and she said, no more pain. I wasn't confident that the relief would last. I saw her a couple of weeks later and she just said, no, I'm back on the bowling team. I have no more pain in my arm. And this kind of thing happened a couple of times, and a few times. And I said, no, I need to really learn how to facilitate this and explore more what's happening here. And that was a big transition, I think, in the way I was operating, the way I was working, and how far back I was taking people.
So when that happened, did you just think it was like, oh, this is kind of weird? But did you look into any literature that would support this?
Yeah, it got me reading. And there is a lot of literature that will support it. And at the time, it was a big question mark for me. Was it a fantasy? Was it imagination? Was it real memory? For me, the main thing was her pain was gone. And that's really what we were trying to attempt. So I was okay sitting with the question mark, not knowing exactly what it was or why it happened. Mm-hmm. But I've seen too much now to really doubt it.
I mean, you've experienced quite a bit in your life, right? Like, I mean, you still got a lot of game in front of you, but when you turned 40, you experienced what most people yearn for in meditation, right? Like that inward diving, that feeling of oneness, right? Like, can you talk about that?
Yeah, for sure. And that's one of the central themes in essential healing. And this was really a spontaneous experience for me. I was on the beach, sunrise. I'm not a big morning person, but at the beach and the sun coming up, that was a special time on my 40th birthday, meditating. And this kind of scene or experience unfolded. I didn't have the intention of achieving this, which I think was helpful because I didn't have a preconception or expectations. But I saw an image of a big fire in front of me and was invited to walk into it. And it seemed to have the effect of kind of burning through some of the armoring, the protection, some of the beliefs that led me to my core self. And in the center of my being, I found it was sort of like a flame of a candle. It wasn't so big, like the candle you have burning there. And it had, you know how a candle flame sort of dances? This had a certain rhythm or movement to it. And as I observed it, it grew into this huge fire, really, that engulfed me. And I just really felt my consciousness expand, I guess is the best way I could explain it, and felt like I was really much more in my true and authentic self. And that state of being lasted for a few days. You know, I wish I could always maintain that. It's a constant effort. You have to make a constant attempt to reconnect. I have to make a constant attempt to reconnect with that. But I knew it was there. I experienced it, and it wasn't conceptual, it was experiential. And so it became easier from that moment on to reconnect with that. And I say it's a kind of invoking or inviting that to come forward in each of us.
You call it the soul essence, right?
Yeah.
And then the crusts or the layers are like the mental mind, and then you go deeper down, and as you get closer and closer, the heart, and as you get closer, you touch back into that soul essence area.
Yeah, and so many sessions that I conducted for people, we would get stuck because once you move someone out of their conscious, rational thinking mind and begin to dive into the feelings, there's often a lot of protection around the heart. And if that door is closed, if that's armored, it's very difficult to reconnect with your authentic self. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the work I began doing many years ago was helping people identify, I call it objectification, to have them describe this protection around their heart as an object. And once they could describe it as a brick wall or a steel door or whatever it might be, then we could begin to enter into some relationship with it. They could dialogue with it. They could even thank it. And this was sort of the magic in the process. Was most of us want that gone so we can get in. And the way to really help it soften is to acknowledge it, to say, well, you were really necessary. You helped me get through those really rough times, mm-hmm. right? But now, with this shield in place, it's difficult to receive love when it does come my way. And it holds in the wounds, the hurts from the past. So then there was a gradual process of opening heart, letting open again. And then flood of emotions often, right? And these crusty layers of, well, beliefs, right? We come to believe certain things about ourselves and in the world that aren't necessarily true. I'm not enough is a really big one, right? I think many of us live with. It's my fault, right? And it's these beliefs that we come to think of as true that really limit how we interact in the world.
Mm-hmm. Are these beliefs developed at early childhood stages, or is that something that could come over from past lives as well?
Yeah. So we develop these in childhood, right? Especially adolescence and early childhood. We store emotions that are triggered in certain situations. We form beliefs that we operate from that limit us in many ways. And a really big one is the survival strategies. It's what you learn to do in life to stay safe and to get love and acceptance, right? And so, yeah, these develop from a rather narrow or limited possibilities when we're young, and then influence us as life goes on. But what I came to realize doing these more spiritual regressions, both to past life and to between life, when we're just a soul not in a body, the soul carries these beliefs, these emotions, and these survival strategies as well. And those really influence us in our life too. Sometimes it's over lifetimes.
How do you clear them out though?
Well, I facilitate first an awareness and exploration, start to identify them. And it isn't so much me that clears them out, but helping someone to clear them out. So I think the first step is the awareness that that's there, right? That, oh, I hold this belief that the world's a dangerous place, or I got killed for opening my mouth in a past life. That's why it's difficult for me to speak my truth now, right? Didn't work out so well last time. Once someone can, from a higher perspective, that's one of the essential pieces of this is to expand consciousness so that we can see things from a higher, more objective perspective, not from the limited perspective of the ego or the mind. And it's in that higher perspective that we can look back and say, well, that made sense then, but look at the trouble it's causing in my life now. And then we find a solution for it.
Oh, man, so many questions. When you're taking a patient or someone goes in that in between life state, right? Do they give you any type of wisdom while they're there from that soul level? Like, more or less about like why we're here?
Absolutely. It's one of the biggest values in going there is that people are free from the limitations of the mental mind. They regain their soul perspective and a much higher perspective of things and are much more able to remember why they incarnated, what they came to not just do, but came to learn on this sometimes tough school we call planet Earth.
Well, have they given you any, like, do they talk to you from that soul level, maybe from your soul or maybe your collective consciousness, wherever that may be, and sometimes give you insight?
I always like to keep the focus on them. They've come to have this experience. But yes, I feel really honored that I can spend a good part of most days in that state with them and hearing. I mean, there are universal lessons, I believe, right? Much of what you're working on learning is the same thing I'm working on learning. You know, we may have different pace with it, but yeah, there are certain universal truths and lessons that people get in these sessions that I feel it's a great honor to hear them talk about and even be in the energy of it as they describe it.
Sure. What do they say? Like, why do we come here on this earth? Like, is it a school? Is it us? You know, are we God just trying to remember that we are that? You know?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a deep question.
Absolutely. And yeah, and I wonder sometimes why a soul with all the wisdom it has from living lifetimes, as it incarnates and joins with the body and the brain, gets amnesia and then has to start trying to learn to remember these things or learn these lessons again. But yeah, I think that the same kind of stories that people that have near-death experiences tell about reevaluating their lives, what's important for them after they have this near-death experience, is very similar to what someone that has a past life or a life between life regression comes away going, well, so many of those things that bothered me or that I thought were important in life, especially materialistic goals, not that they lose value, but it isn't so much your focus then. It's more about how can I be a more kind, it all comes back to love, really. How can I be a more kind and loving person towards others? How can I be a more kind and loving person towards myself? And what are the aspects of my character that I'm working on healing or evolving over lifetimes? So we all have kind of themes that we work on over lifetimes, right? And when we can identify what those are, it's much easier then to focus on accomplishing that. Mm-hmm. It doesn't just naturally happen magically that now I know. When I looked at some of my own soul lessons doing this work, even though I knew and was shown sort of repeating a certain pattern over 3 lifetimes prior to this one, and the message being, you got to quit repeating this. You kind of have to get on with things, God. And I knew it, I got it. And so that was very helpful. But to be able to live it differently, something in me very much had this sort of momentum in this one direction that it took me probably 9 months to really adjust course and begin to live what I'd learned in the session.
Oh, that's amazing. Spirit guides, do we have them, and do they guide us throughout this life?
I was thinking about this before we started the interview, and absolutely we do. And it's so reassuring for someone that feels so alone in life, feels unsupported in life, to make contact with their guide and it's not necessarily seeing someone in a wizard costume, but feeling a presence or having a communication that's loving and supportive and knowing and saying, yeah, even in those times when you're alone, I'm here for you. It's reassuring to know that. And I think that both our loved ones who are in the spirit world and our guides are very present, but we're so caught up in our own human mind and ego and daily life that we're not so in touch with them. And I think that the more we can connect first with our own inner wisdom and soul self, and then with our guides and loved ones, it's a very different human being. We live in a very, very different way as that veil thins and when we're connected.
Mm-hmm. Well, how do you connect with that, right? Like, what are some, I feel like there are signs. I feel like, God is always trying to speak to us or our guides. How do we disconnect from societal, mechanisms, materialism, just the show that's going on, right? The drama. How do we connect? How do we start looking for signs? How do we recognize them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's one part of it is watching for the signs, being aware of them. They're around us all the time, and I think we miss them. My mother passed in February, and so I began to watch for signs, and there were so many. I didn't see her standing in the room, but a couple of days after she passed, we were in the Canary Islands. We went to this Catholic church. I'm not Catholic, but it was a beautiful church. We wanted to light a candle and do a prayer for her. We went into the church and did this, and then we left, had a coffee. We were walking back. It was 5:00, and they play the bells in the church at that time. And they usually play Amazing Grace. But for some reason that day, they played a Beethoven song from Beethoven's Ninth Symphony that I love, and it's called Ode to Joy. And my mother's name was Joy.
Wow.
Right. But we asked the woman in the church about that. She said, I don't know why that's playing. We don't play that. We play Amazing Grace. but some reason today is owed to joy. So there were a lot of signs like that. And those, I think, are encouraging, especially when someone's lost someone that they're very close to.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. But we doubt it though, right? Like the analytical mind doubts it, that, oh, that's a sign. That's coincidence, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So to go back to your original question, how do we do that, right? And so I think one of the first steps is to start to learn to differentiate between the thoughts that your conscious mind generates, all this critical talk, all this analytical talk. We need it to function in the world. You can't get by without it. But as you start to learn to observe what it is that you hear your mind saying to you, oh, there my mind goes saying that again. You could have done that better, or worrying about something. And yeah, so that's one, is start to observe what your mind is saying. And the next step really is to work to be more in the present moment, because mental mind is really much better at ruminating, right? Regrets for the past or worrying about the future, but it's not so good about being in the present moment. And so learning to be in the present moment, the easiest way really is to follow your breath, because your breath is happening right now. And so if I can focus on my breath, my mind comes more still and in the moment. It may drift off, if you practice meditation, it goes different directions, but the breath is a good way to bring it back. And then observe your thoughts. And the third way that I find so effective is to move from thinking into feeling, because the feeling state is very different than conscious, rational, analytical mind. It isn't really rational, is it? But feeling state is connected with subconscious mind and body. And so it's one step closer to what lives within us rather than what lives up here above our shoulders.
I love that. Because you are a hypnotherapist and you've done this a lot, can you get yourself in those deep states and connect with your higher self or with your spirit guides and communicate with them?
Yes, it's much, much easier. When I was first practicing meditation, if I had 20 minutes to sit and meditate, I'd spend 19 minutes trying to quiet my mind pretty unsuccessfully. When I learned some of the hypnosis techniques, it made it much easier, much more direct to achieve a state where mental mind isn't absent. It's ever present, and it should be. It's a safeguard, and it has to learn from what I experience in this other state. But I no longer felt like I was such a prisoner of it, right? It's still intrusive sometimes, but I've learned to work with it and really thank it for, just trying to keep me safe, really. And then reconnecting with something that's deeper within me. My inner child is one step closer to my core self, and then making connection with core self that, it comes up with stuff that I wouldn't even thought of. And that sometimes my mind goes, I'm not so sure about that. That's when I know I can really trust it. When the mind doubts it and goes, I'm not sure about that. I know it didn't come from mind, right? It wasn't wishful thinking.
Yeah, I think it's important, like the heart center space, right? Like I did one of your exercises in the book, and I definitely had a protector there. Like it was funny because I had you talk about like steel doors and things like that are in front of the heart space when you go to that space. Mine was like a wooden like moat, like with a river around it, and I actually had a knight there, like a medieval knight protecting my heart space, like. And there was no talking to this character. Like, I don't know who he was, but there was no talk. Like, he was not there to talk. Like, he just was protecting the heart space and was like, "You're not." No, like I had to, like, in my meditation, like we were wrestling, and then finally got him to calm down and was able to like communicate with him and then enter the heart space. But like what I found there was a flame, just like that, right? that's exactly what I found in my heart
Beautiful.
space. Like I walked into the heart. It was like I don't know what words I can describe it, but it was beautiful. And there was a flame and the flame, um, depending upon what I was speaking about, either stayed that small or
Mm.
got really big. So like if it was something that like was in relationship to the podcast or what I'm inspired to research, or my curiosity gets fired up about, the flame would get massive. But if it's
Love that.
something, if it's something that isn't true for me or isn't something that inspires me, it gets really small. So like I've I've been using it in my
Mm.
real life, in my my beta state throughout my
Hmm.
day. I'll kind of go back to the heart center, and use it to guide me to make decisions. Like, right.
Beautiful.
Just going off the heart space, because I feel like that's our true compass. That's our true north. Like, so if I have to make a decision on something, instead of like analytically dissecting it and making it from the mind, I'm going to the heart and I'm asking the flame, what's the best decision? What's the best decision for me? And depending upon how big that flame gets, I know what I should do.
Hearing that makes it worth me that I wrote the book. Really, it's so good to hear that.
Well, going back to the book, you have another part in there. It's so fascinating. You have a near-death experience, but I just love regression. I love regression therapy. I love near-death experiences. I mean, this book has everything that I'm all about: healing trauma, near-death experiences, and regression therapy. I don't know what else. I don't know what else a guy needs in this world but that. But near death, right? Like, what's crazy is that you had a near-death experience. You were struck by lightning.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, the actual experience of being struck by lightning was really unpleasant, very painful, and had a lot of trouble following it. But realizing that my consciousness continued, even though my body was unconscious, and I don't know exactly how long, I guess around 10 minutes. But knowing that I continued to live, even though my body wasn't alive, wasn't functioning, and having the experience of going home and experiencing the kind of love that we all long for, and getting messages that would help me in my daily life, and then coming back into that body that was in the street, in the water, was really transformational. It really, really changed me. So I was doing this kind of work already, but not with the same consciousness, not with the same intention, not with the same awareness or even heart and soul. Gave me a very different perspective on myself, on life.
Well, at the time, do you consciously remember it after it happened?
No, I just knew something profound happened. And it wasn't until about 6 months later that a colleague regressed me back to just before the lightning strike and took me through it really in slow motion to process it and help me do two things. There was a lot of trauma from the electrocution stored in my body that was causing trouble, fears and short-term memory loss and some physical problems. So he helped me release that and then recover those memories of that journey home, what I was told, and then the return to my body. So that's something I really, since then, I thought, well, how could I conduct a session for someone that they could have the same kind of profound experiences without the trauma, without the getting killed part, right? And it took me a long time to find a way to do that. It wasn't really until I met Dr. Michael Newton, who was doing the life between life regression, and then hearing other people's near-death stories, learning how to replicate that. And I had the opportunity, time is funny since Corona, but 4 years ago to conduct regressions for sudden cardiac arrest patients. So they'd all had heart attacks or their heart had stopped, and they'd all been resuscitated. And in regression, most of them could tell you exactly what was happening before they were resuscitated. They could tell you what was going on with the EMTs. They could tell you what was going on with the paramedics, with the ambulance. But they also told these fantastic stories about going to a place of light, getting guidance, being told to come back, meeting a loved one that they may have known from their life or maybe even hadn't met in this life, but that they knew existed in some way. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot there to explore. And I think the biggest change for me is you can believe in reincarnation. You can think it's an interesting concept and maybe it's true, but to really experience yourself free from the body and conscious and experience the spirit realm, it's no longer a theory. You know, I don't question, is there life after death? It's a big question that people hold. I'm not afraid of death. Dying part, okay, you know, but being dead part, that's fantastic, really. It's a beautiful place.
Well, I mean, you were struck by lightning. I mean, that is, oof. I got to think.
Like hell.
Yeah, I got to think anything is better than that, I would assume. I mean, geez.
I don't recommend it.
150 million volts of electricity.
Yeah.
And then coming back and talking about it, that's a phenomenon. Yeah. I mean, but then, you know, what's crazy about it is that you had to be regressed to experience near death. So that's phenomenal as well, because now you have this interesting insight on regressing people and re-experiencing that near death. That's fun.
So you're studying psychology, so you know that one of the defense mechanisms, one of the way we survive huge trauma is to forget, right? And so I'd forgotten, but the memory's there. And people that suffered near-death experiences don't always remember that they had one. They just know that now they're depressed, or now that life is meaningless to them, or what was important isn't anymore. And going back and remembering why they came back, you know, why they were sent back even to Earth and to their body and to their life, can be really helpful in making it possible then to achieve what it is you came back to do.
Mm-hmm. Did you go to school for hypnotherapy? What was your training in?
Yeah, I've had a lot of training, and I teach a lot of courses in it now. One of the problems with hypnosis is that back when I trained in 91, I had a whopping 2-day hypnosis training, right? And so my confidence level was, well, I'm pretty sure I was never hypnotized, and I certainly don't know how to hypnotize anybody, right? So I think we've come a long ways since then, and I've much more experience since then. So it's really a lifelong learning. And honestly, most of what I've learned has been sitting in the chair working with people.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Now you're, working with the Newton Institute.
Mm-hmm.
How has that changed your life?
Well, I think that after the near-death experience, I was trying to figure out how to help someone have that kind of transformational experience without the trauma. And somehow past life was sort of close to it, but still something missing. And in 2001, I went down to Virginia Beach to assist at this training that was the first time Michael Newton was teaching how to do LBL. And I saw him work. I saw him do the one and only live demonstration that he's done at the training. And I said, oh, this man really found a way. He found how to go from the death seen in the past life that we were all working with, and take them beyond that into spirit. And that's where people could have the same kind of experience I had in near-death experience without having to go through the pain. Mm. And so that really changed my practice. I've been focused on that since then. And I love that work. It's like I said, it's really an honor to be able to sit in the room with someone that's experiencing that.
Do you recommend people become therapists, like traditional therapists, before they go into hypnotherapy?
It can be really helpful. And so it can work either way. Either they're traditional therapists and they bring a skill set that they can expand upon to do hypnotherapy, right? Some will come to hypnosis without any prior experience. And I think that the scope of practice then is rather limited, right? So there's two sort of styles, if you will, excuse me, in hypnosis. And traditional hypnosis was based on suggestibility, that in a hypnotic state, a person is more open to suggestion that can help change desired behavior. You can't make someone do something they don't want to do, but if they want to achieve something, you can give suggestions that will influence the subconscious mind and help them achieve that, right? But the other thing that I saw happening in hypnosis is that a person has a higher consciousness. They have a more expanded consciousness. They have a higher perspective. And it's that more objective perspective that we use both for something we call parts therapy and something we call regression therapy. They're kind of different methods that often go to the same place. But when I take someone back to childhood or past life, I'm not suggesting that they were someone in their past life. That would be really inappropriate and not very therapeutic. But we leave it open and take them back to the source of their fear, their guilt, their shame. And we don't know, is it going to be childhood? Will it be womb? Will it be past life? We sort of let it unfold and see. Right? And parts therapy really, from this objective perspective, to facilitate a dialogue with different parts of our psyche. So I can interact with my inner child, or I can interact with my inner critic, or I can interact with my protector that night that's relentless, saying, no, there's no way you're getting in here, right? So that's much more doable in a hypnotic state or expanded state of consciousness than it is in a rational state. So I can tell you the story about why I got hurt and why I need to protect myself, but it doesn't stop me from protecting myself. But if I can dialogue with that night and thank him for the good job he did, the fact I'm still alive and doing the work I'm doing, then we can enter into a relationship and he's going to soften. He's going to let me in, as you experienced.
Yeah, I had to fight that. I had to fight that bad boy. He wasn't listening. What turned you on to therapy? Like, what about it? Like, I mean, had you always had a curiosity about how to help people, or were you just drawn to this?
I think, like many therapists, when I was younger, I looked at my parents and their second marriages, and I'm 18, 19, 20. And I thought, there has to be something more to life than working, making money, and having some unsuccessful relationship. And I didn't know what it was, but I was introduced to a kind of healing that originated in Japan, energy healing, really, that I felt a great resonance with, and went to Japan to study when I was 20, 21. And I lived there 2 years, learned the language, and studied this energy healing, and came back to the US. This is in the late 70s, and started to practice that. And so there was a spiritual belief system around that. And as I was conducting these healing sessions, started looking at other healing practices like Reiki or therapeutic touch, breath work, this kind of thing. And then finally getting some Rogerian training, right? Carl Rogers, so I could stop giving advice and start learning to listen to people. And then eventually hypnosis, and sort of shifted from me being the healer doing something to someone to me being the facilitator that helped create a safe space, help someone get out of their analytical mind and tune into their own inner wisdom. So it's a very client-centered approach that to me feels, well, very sacred.
Sure. It's like empowering the patient almost to find their own truth and their own path to healing.
I love that.
I love it too. What would you suggest to people that are listening to this now that may be interested in becoming a hypnotherapist?
There are a lot of different schools. I teach once or twice a year. In September, I have a course in basic hypnosis, and then in October in regression therapy, and mentor people through that process and help them start practicing. And there's plenty to read on the topic as well. But I think having the experience yourself is one of the first steps. I don't think I could really relate to the state that's achieved without experiencing it myself. So an experiential training, not something that's canned or pre-recorded, where so you have interaction with other people. We're doing it all on Zoom now, right? We aren't doing in-person classes again yet, but it's working great in the breakout rooms. We lecture, then I'll demonstrate the skill, and then we have people practice with supervision. We take them through that.
Do you guys teach how to like open your own business and like teach them the business principles of like maybe functioning out in society as a hypnotherapist?
That's part of the course. It's not the primary focus, though. Yeah,
sure.
But
sure.
There are enough associations that focus on that and teach that. We recommend those classes and the conferences where people can learn to do that. Yeah, it takes time. I mean, you don't take a training and then suddenly you have a full practice, right? Probably as you began your podcast too, it took time to build it before you had a lot of people listening and followers. Same thing. It takes time to build a practice.
Well, how do you?
Some people. Sorry.
No, go ahead. Finish what you're going to say.
Some people have real talent and skill for it, and others will come sometimes, and it's more for their own personal growth, and they don't go on and practice.
How long is your course?
We have 14 days with time in between, and then there are case studies and mentoring after that. So it usually takes a person about 1.5 to 2 years.
Paul, this has been amazing. How can people find out more about you? Where can they buy the book?
They can buy the book in any bookstore. It's on Amazon. It's in most of the online bookstores as well. Right. This is actually the anniversary, 1 year of the publication of the book.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was just released in Spanish. So it's in Spain and in Latin America now too.
That's amazing. Awesome. Well, I can't thank you enough. This is like, I really feel like, this work is truly, it's truly healing. It is getting to the heart of the problem. It's seeing exactly shining the light on the shadow and seeing where the trauma is. And I can't thank you enough for writing the book and doing the work that you do.
Well, thanks for putting it out there. I really appreciate it.